This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Hey, hotcakes. Welcome to Hot Take. I'm Amy Westervelt.
I was mocking you. You can start over. And I'm Mariana East Hegler. Amy, climate change is really making itself felt this month with fires, floods, and heat waves, and probably a bunch of other shit I'm forgetting to name. It's kind of wild to watch all that happen. And meanwhile, these old white guys in Washington are still like, I'll trade you one oil lease for one wind farm.
Right? I know. I'm tired of having to keep track every day of the new bullshit that Manchin is trying to peddle. And I don't know.
Oh my God, yes.
Keeping track of that and all of the climate disasters happening right now is kind of making my head spin. I was just actually reading about the Oak Fire in California, which I just assumed was out because I hadn't read about it since it started, but it's still less than half contained. So this is the one that was threatening Yosemite. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. It just got me thinking too about how the way that we cover these things really needs to change, because it's sort of everything gets coverage the day that it hits, or the day that it, hits a particular size if it's a fire. And then we kind of never hear about it again, which is not the experience of the people in that community. Right. So, yeah.
Yeah. It seems like the last time the media has been able to cover a disaster long term really was Katrina.
Yes.
Honestly, Maria deserved Katrina level coverage and didn't get it.
Yeah.
And honestly, just hurricanes in general deserve that type of coverage, because now no hurricane is touching, ground that hasn't been already hurt by a hurricane.
Right.
So,
right.
And same thing with fires, because there's another fire that's already surpassed Oak Fire, and it's the largest fire in Northern California right now. And then there's the heat waves that are continuing everywhere, including the one in India, which everybody act like that one ended. Also in Basra, Iraq, the temperatures are over 120 degrees this week. And people there have had no electricity for 15 days. That is more than 2 weeks.
And we're not seeing, I really hadn't seen much about this at all in the media, with the exception of the Times UK and the BBC, which have kind of been tracking things happening in Iraq in general. The Times was tracking everything happening in Basra. And of course, these are UK media outlets. Why are they so interested in Basra? Well, because guess who controls the oil fields there, Mary?
Oh my gosh, is it BP?
It's BP. Yeah, it's BP.
Oh, so predictable. So predictable. Yeah. Fuck those guys.
Yeah. They created a whole sub company called the Basra Oil Company that, gets the blame for a lot of this stuff, but the buck should really stop with BP.
The Basra Oil Company?
Yeah. Just a mom and pop oil shop in Iraq, Mary.
Right. Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the heat dome is back in the Pacific Northwest. And last week it was the East Coast and Western Europe. And this week it's the Pacific Northwest. It's just frying like an egg. There's expected to be even more heat next week. And let's remember what's going on in India, like we just talked about. There have been 200 heat waves in India this year. And last year, there were 36 total there. Also, have you heard about how they're naming heat waves now?
I had not heard that. Wow.
Yeah, they've named a heat wave in Spain, and apparently they're going to keep doing that. And it comes with all these different categories of kind of categorizing them
like hurricanes.
Yeah,
wow.
like hurricanes.
That's a real sign of where we're
necessary.
At.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is.
Wow. Yeah, it's all really scary, and it's pretty relentless. I feel like this is maybe the longest we've gone with really no break in coverage of pretty significant climate disasters, just like one right after the other, which is why, you know, growing the fossil fuel industry right now makes no goddamn sense.
It really
So we're going to talk about that today.
Really
we're going to talk about what's happening in the US, where, you know, again, Joe Manchin, always on that bullshit. And globally, where there's like a real major oil boom happening, but we're not really hearing about it much in the media. I think, you know, there was this big story in the New York Times this past week about what's happening in the Congo. And I know I saw like a lot of people going, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. And I'm like, yeah, this is happening a lot all over the world. And we're just not hearing about it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
We're going to get into all of that. And Amy's got a billionaire to burn. So you ready?
Yep. It's time to talk about climate.
So Amy, have you heard about the great news that Joe Manchin has finally seen the light and he has come out as a climate hero? It can happen, okay? Like your climate denying uncle can turn into, I don't know, some sort of activist at some point. I don't know. I can't keep doing this, Amy. What the fuck happened here? What am I looking at?
Oh God. I feel like Joe Manchin right now is like that guy. I feel like everyone has worked with someone like this who's just like, that won't work. That won't work. Nope, that's no good. And then they propose like the shittiest version of everyone's ideas as their own. And they're like, this is the way. You're like, man.
Is that how you would describe the Inflation Reduction Act?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's like, you know, Joe Manchin dragged his feet on Build Back Better. Then he said, if you get this Infrastructure Act passed, then I will work with you on the Build Back Better stuff. Then, of course, he turned his back on that and was like, I didn't say that. Classic Joe. And now he has proposed his own bill, which is the Inflation Reduction Act, which does include some funding for clean energy, quite a bit of funding. You know, it's like over $300 billion in funding for stuff that most climate folks agree we need funding for, giveaways for the fossil fuel industry in here. I think the reactions, honestly, I feel like have been pretty extreme on like one side or the other. You know, it's like you either have people who are like, you know, I don't care there's all this bad stuff in it. We have to get this passed because if we don't get it passed, we're not going to get anything for climate. And like 360 billion or 370 billion for clean energy is worth putting up with all these other things. And you know, we can solve these other things in other ways later. And then you have a lot of people also being like, no, you know, we shouldn't even engage with this because it's total bullshit. And you know, as we know from the past, right, if we agree to compromises like this, they never end up going well for climate. So I don't know. It's a complicated situation. And I feel very torn about it because on the one hand, yes, I do want funding for clean energy and I do want some kind of climate appropriations to be happening, but I'm very concerned about the types of trade-offs that are being demanded here. And I really dislike the way that some folks have been kind of shutting down any criticism at all. I don't think that that's helpful. I don't think it's helpful.
I don't think that's helpful either.
At all to be like, just hold your nose and, you know, get through it and we'll get to these other things later, right? I also think that there's an argument to be made for, okay, well, you know, some of these things are really, really necessary and we're not going to get them any other way, you know? But I just don't like the like kind of zero sum all in or all out way that this is being discussed so far.
I mean, it's being discussed on Twitter, right? And that's where nuance goes to die.
On Twitter and in the media, too. I think, like, but even in some of the media coverage, it's like maybe because the experts that people are talking to are also kind of like really firmly on like one side or the other, and I'm like,
I mean, the thing that gives me the most pause is that I understand there's a lot of funding in there for CCS, which is carbon capture and storage for folks who don't live in, acronym land. And so carbon capture and storage would mean just like, first of all, it doesn't really exist. So the way I'm going to describe it is going to sound fantastical because it is fantastical. It's basically attaching some sort of contraption to a power plant, sucking all the carbon out, and then storing that carbon somewhere. No one knows how to do this safely. And the places where those power plants generally are is near what we call frontline communities because they're like on the front lines of the climate crisis, right? And these tend to be Black and brown communities that are near this infrastructure. And those are the communities where this carbon would allegedly be stored, or also where like these power plants and this fossil fuel infrastructure also releases other harmful gases. And this would do nothing. Carbon capture and storage would do nothing to protect them from those gases, right? So like those people are still going to suffer. So I'm very concerned about a bill that like has all this funding for carbon capture and storage, but very little regulation for it, as I understand.
Right. Well, and we're talking about like an industry. I mean, to me, the thing that like always blows my mind about carbon capture and storage and like the idea of building out a massive carbon capture and storage industry is that it would be largely controlled by the oil and gas industry, which newsflash doesn't have a great track record on safely storing and transporting things that are dangerous to human health. And it would require building out like a whole new pipeline infrastructure for compressed CO2, which is incredibly dangerous if it's leaked. So like there's been some, this has happened already. Yeah. There was a story in HuffPost last year about this, where there was a leak from a carbon capture project.
Oh, right. And it basically turned everybody into a zombie.
Yes, it like poisoned a whole town in Mississippi. And like,
yes, people were hallucinating and going like fucking nuts
and frothing at the mouth. And like, I mean, it was really, really, really crazy.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's the potential for compressed CO2. If it leaks, that's what happens to large communities of people. So like, yeah, not only are you not addressing the issue of volatile organic compounds coming out of oil refineries and sort of related oil operations, but also you're creating a whole new problem.
Right, exactly. And that's why the environmental justice movement exists in the first place, because the white environmental movement has a tendency to create problems, or let's say solutions that create problems for these communities. And so I think there is this knee-jerk reaction to a bill like this from those sorts of communities being like, hey, wait a minute, we already know we can't trust you. And so all of this like, oh, we're going to come back and clean that up later, and we have to build this now, because otherwise like we won't get anything at all ever. That rings really hollow to environmental justice communities that have been hearing that literally for decades or more if you really want to look at it. So, yeah, I think, yes, we need to get some climate action done. But after a while, if you keep having the same unintended consequences on the same communities, it is no longer an unintended consequence. It's an allowable casualty. And that's not okay. You can't expect people to be okay with sacrificing themselves and everything that they love for the, quote, greater good that they will never live to see. So, yes, we need to pass this bill, but like the bill could use some work, maybe?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. But I also think that it's like, it's not like we were on track to pass great climate policy and this is derailing it. You know what I mean? Like even with the Mountain Valley Pipeline stuff, it's like Manchin has been pushing that forever. It's an LNG pipeline, right? So this is liquid natural gas. And, 2 months ago, Biden signed this deal with the European Union to supply a large amount of liquefied natural gas to Europe with demand locked in for the next 10 years. So, like, I don't know. I feel like we need to look at like the entire way that this party and this administration is looking at this issue. And like, it's a lot of problems all the way through. And I think, for Manchin, it's like, what? Natural gas is better than coal, right?
The other thing I wanted to ask you about, though, so Manchin didn't write this by himself. He wrote it with Schumer. Kyrsten Sinema was not in the room. Where is she? Has anyone laid eyes on this chick lately?
I fully expect there to be like some issue coming from her. She's sort of like hemmed and hawed about having not been consulted about the stuff related to pharmaceuticals and Medicare in this, which I feel like that part of the bill hasn't really gotten nearly as much attention as the climate stuff. But there is some good stuff for healthcare in here, including actually funding healthcare for people with black lung disease. Joe Manchin was also pushing. It's wild to me, that he's like, we need to take care of people with black lung, but like, let's totally like get the next version of black lung going with all of this like fossil fuel and natural gas stuff, like just no awareness there whatsoever.
Yeah, I did a quick Google, and here's what Fox News headline says. Sinema still undecided on Manchin's social spending bill. Will make determination after parliamentarian review. I'm sorry.
Boy.
So on Fox News, it is now called the Manchin social spending bill. And you know what? Let me click off of this before my computer self-destructs.
Yeah. I mean, it's very much the sort of like, the market will take care of the rest. If we just fund a lot of renewable energy, then, the market will magically just turn away from fossil fuels. And unfortunately, what we know from the fossil fuel industry is that they don't just respond to market signals. Like, that's just not a thing. They tell this story like we're just supplying a demand. If we're just operating within the markets. We're just behaving according to what the public wants and what people want to buy, right? But, if you look back at what happened when Americans got really good at conserving energy in the 1970s, when there was legitimately restrained supply because there was an oil embargo against the U.S. from OPEC, and there was genuinely less oil available to the United States at that time, Americans got really good at conserving. And there's all these shareholder magazines and internal memos from the 80s when all of a sudden, because they had lobbied for being able to drill in more places and whatnot, they had a sudden increase in supply, but people were not consuming as much as they once had. And there are all of these oil executives kind of being like, what are we going to do? How are we going to get people consuming more gas again, more electricity again? And the answer was just like tinker with the prices, get the prices low enough, and you can get people consuming more. And, of course, some creative like PR and marketing and all of that stuff too. So this idea that like they will just go quietly into the night if there's a market preference for decarbonized energy, it's just not what we've ever seen that industry do. And I think relying on that is pretty foolish. Again, I do also think that the spending on clean energy and that the permitting stuff that would actually make it possible to have large-scale renewable energy. So, I mean, just so people understand, like, without these permitting reforms, large-scale renewable energy won't necessarily work in the U.S. Also, I think without the sort of long-term commitments to renewable energy in this bill, it's very hard for the solar and wind industries to keep growing. They have been in this weird holding pattern for the last decade where like they literally have to wait until the end of the year every year to find out if they're like going to get certain programs funded the next year. It's insane. Like, how can you make business decisions that way?
Right.
So this would give them, okay, you have like a decade of runway, right? Like you can take a breath and you can actually build out larger projects, and you're going to be able to get that energy distributed because we're going to fix all of these transmission issues. So these are genuinely like major blockers to energy transition that need to be dealt with. I just don't understand why we have to give up on decarbonization entirely in order to get them. It's not the best solution from purely a climate perspective, which is how we really need politicians to be looking at this, because like we've talked about a million times on this show and, last week on Positively Dreadful, like as much as politicians would like this to be a neat and tidy issue that works just like healthcare policy, it just doesn't.
It doesn't.
We have a limited amount of time here, and like the physics don't change because your campaign changes,
The stakes are so much higher, right? Like with every other issue, you're hurting people today and you could stop tomorrow. But with climate change, you're hurting people tomorrow and the day after and the day after and the day after. And it's like, it's difficult to go back and recover those lives. You can recover some of them as well you should, which is basically what we're doing right now. Locking in warming is a bad idea. But the thing about the Manchin bill is that it's not the only place where climate action is happening. There's a couple of other places too. And we're going to talk about them after the break.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso and Samra Origins by the Weekend Coffee Collection.
Introducing Samra Origins. My collaboration with Nespresso is a connection to my roots, to my mother, Samra. Coffee that hits the right notes. It transports you. Crafted with unique notes and bold, soaring flavors. Experience a taste that moves you. Nespresso and Samra Origins.
Discover more at Nespresso.com.
My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
So, Amy, what's the latest with the climate emergency? Are we doing that or what?
I have no idea. I do think that some of the talk of climate emergency might have helped to further these negotiations that happened. I do also want to mention a couple of other things. One is that there was a protest of the congressional baseball game. Now, you and I are not DC people, Mary. So I think for me, I'm like, who cares about a congressional ball game? People care.
I didn't even know Congress played sports. I really didn't.
Yeah, they do. And this game is of course sponsored by a bunch of corporations.
Is
among
BP
them,
one of them?
Yes, BP and Chevron
Amen.
were two of the corporate sponsors of this baseball game. The police response to this was insane. I saw it on Twitter. There was a video. I mean, we're talking about a couple dozen people who were holding up signs and chanting a bit, but they were not being, aggressive or violent in any way. And the DC Metro Police, Capitol Police, and Park Police were called, along with the stadium's private security. They were yanking people's banners away from them.
Wow.
And they arrested everyone. So yeah, anyway, there was quite a bit of protest when it looked like the Democrats were just going to kind of say, okay, well, we're just not going to get any kind of climate stuff done in the budget conversations and this budget reconciliation thing that's been dragging on and on. So that was happening. I think the threat of maybe Biden declaring a climate emergency played into it
In
as
his
well.
speech, he did say the words climate and emergency together a lot.
Yeah.
Or close together a lot. He didn't declare a climate emergency, but I felt it coming. I did.
Yeah, well, also I think it's important to note that he has done a couple of the things that people want him to do as part of declaring a climate emergency. Like he's already done those things even without declaring an emergency. So as part of the response, it's been real quiet. As part of the response to to Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the high gas prices and whatnot, he did use the Defense Production Act to get money to solar manufacturers and heat pump manufacturers and to try to offset people's electricity bills. That was something that was being really heavily pushed by Cori Bush, who, again, I'm like, where is the coverage of Cori Bush and all of this stuff? She's been like pushing a lot of really interesting stuff. Like I rarely see her name come up in discussions about climate negotiations or climate policy.
Well, Black women tend to get erased. So yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But the Defense Production Act is something that shows up in this Manchin stuff. And it's also something that people have talked about as budget that Biden would be able to access if he declares a climate emergency. So there's some talk of like, well, could he do both? Like, could he, if he were like a Mitch McConnell type of politician, he would get this deal with Manchin done and then turn around, declare a climate emergency and use executive powers to block any of the fossil fuel stuff in the bill. But
he's no Mitch.
And that would probably just land him in front of the Supreme Court, which we all know how that would be likely to go. So there's some talk of like, well, he could still declare a climate emergency and use it maybe to fund some of the environmental justice programs that are not showing up in this bill. Yeah. So there's a lot of like, get this bill passed first, and then the climate emergency stuff becomes that much easier to do.
Can he use executive power to get rid of the subsidies to fossil fuel companies?
I mean, he promised to do that.
Mm-hmm. I recall.
So,
I recall.
I'm not sure if that has to be approved by Congress or not, if it has to have congressional backing or not. But that seems like such low-hanging fruit. But then, like we're seeing what's in this Manchin bill. I don't envision getting rid of subsidies for fossil fuel companies being something that they go for. Mm-hmm. Again, I feel like the thing I keep coming back to over and over too is this conversation that we had with Kate Aronoff earlier this year about nationalizing oil companies, right? The reason that we're so beholden to them is because the government has given them so much fucking power. Like, even in the wake of all the Russia-Ukraine stuff, you had Biden and congressional Democrats basically like begging the fossil fuel companies to produce more oil or to lower prices or, and it's like, well, we could nationalize the fossil fuel industry and then start a managed transition away from fossil fuels. And I'm increasingly feeling like that's like looking more and more like one of the few real options here, because I'm not seeing in this Manchin stuff like a lot of hope that the U.S. government is up to the task of actually dealing with this issue.
Yeah. So there's some interesting stuff going on in Europe right now, right?
Yeah. So it's actually like kind of interesting to see in contrast with the U.S., like how Europe is handling both climate, but also the high gas prices and the heat waves right now. Germany just pushed through a 90% rate decrease on public transit so that people won't be as reliant on gas for their cars. And that kind of removes this whole pain at the pump problem, right? Mm-hmm. So that's pretty interesting.
It removes some of Putin's power too, right?
It does. Yeah. It does. It removes some of Putin's power. It reduces the need, which means that more of those needs can be fulfilled by other sources. There's a lot of... I think to me, I'm just like, oh, this just seems very logical. France is nationalizing its utility to be able to control home energy prices. So they're concerned about not necessarily pain at the pump, but more people's electricity bills and how they're starting to skyrocket because of everything that's happening with Russia, Ukraine, and the need for more natural gas. So there again, it's like, okay, I'm very, very tired of the US government kind of throwing up their hands and saying like, well, we're just beholden to this industry. You don't have to be. Mm-hmm. Belgium is my favorite example. This is not necessarily like super practical or like a policy I'm suggesting necessarily. I just found it to be like something lighthearted to throw in here, which is that they're building a giant ass public pool. They're building like the world's largest public pool for people to cool off in during heat waves, which I'm like, yeah, I like it. I like this idea. Why not? Why can't we get creative about how we're going to help people, deal with this situation? So yeah, I want to like underscore again too that, the thing that Manchin keeps talking about as his big reason for not wanting to rock the boat too much with the fossil fuel industry is inflation. And that's part of why he's calling this the Inflation Reduction Act. And what we're looking at with inflation right now is really, it's all being driven by high gas prices. And those high gas prices are not just happening because of like a simple, straightforward supply and demand problem. Mm-hmm. The oil industry, like they control about like 70% of what goes into pricing gas. They like to like pretend that it's all just, again, like, oh, we have no control over the price of, the price of gas is the price of gas. Nothing to do with us. That's bullshit. That's not true. There is not currently actually a restricted supply of oil in the US. So that's also bullshit. Like this is not a like natural reaction to there being less oil and therefore less gas at gas stations. There is no gas shortage.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a big ass destabilizer. It's a big destabilizer. You can't have shit if the planet ain't really fucking with you no more. Yeah. The other thing about Europe I just want to mention is that, Europe gets left out of these conversations about, the biggest emissions producers in the world. We talked about this on the episode with Darna, but if you calculate their historical emissions when they were empires, which was not long ago, their carbon footprint is ginormous. And then also if you factor in that a lot of these big fossil fuel companies today are based in Europe, their carbon footprint is skyrocketing. So yeah, they're not blameless.
I think we need to really rethink like how carbon footprints are calculated for companies and countries, because like this happens with the US a lot too, right? That people will say, well, US emissions have been going down in the last decade, blah, blah, blah. And that completely ignores the fact that US oil companies are the ones that are expanding fossil fuel use everywhere else in the world. Same with Europe. It's like Total, BP, Shell, those are, like if you look at the largest oil companies in the world, most of them are either European or American, with the exception of Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, and a couple of state-run.
Russia's Rosneft,
And China's.
Exactly. But, I don't really get how companies that are expanding oil production all over the world that are headquartered in your country don't count towards your carbon footprint.
Yeah, Ecuador didn't fuck up its own rainforest.
That's right.
You know what I mean? That was Chevron.
They did not. Yeah, that's right. And Chevron will always go, oh, but Petroecuador. But Chevron trained, and Texaco trained all of the people who run Petroecuador. Like any bad habits they have were learned from American companies. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's like what you were saying earlier about the Iraq oil company.
Yes. Yeah. The Basra Oil Company.
Basra Oil Company. The Bas.
Just a little indie oil company.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. So again, I feel like, yes, we need this funding for clean energy. Yes, we need some kind of climate legislation. Yes, climate funding of some kind is better than no funding. But I think that the idea that any price is worth it for these clean energy advancements, I just don't know that I agree with that. And I also just don't know that we absolutely have to cave on every single thing to get these clean energy improvements.
For sure. So we're going to talk a little bit more about some oil colonialism and Amy's favorite billionaire to hate these days, but get to that in just a minute.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold! Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Speed slow after 35 gigabytes if network's busy. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.
Hey, Fidelity. How can I remember to invest every month?
With the Fidelity app, you can choose a schedule and set up recurring investments in stocks and ETFs.
Oh, that sounds easier than I thought.
You got this.
Yeah, I do. Now, where did I put my keys?
You will find them where you left them.
Investing involves risk, including risk of loss. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC, member NYSE, SIPC.
Okay, so one thing that has come up quite a bit as we're talking about U.S. climate policy is the fact that, climate change is not constrained by borders. And there are a lot of countries in the global south that are suffering already from a lot of climate disasters and will suffer more than a lot of folks elsewhere in the world, especially the US and Europe. So kind of related to that, there's a huge explosion of oil colonialism happening right now. It's like this kind of second wave or maybe last wave. I've heard people describe it as sort of like this last dash to get all the oil out of the ground while these companies still can. And no one wants to be the one left, holding the most worthless oil. So they're all trying to tap that oil as quickly as they can.
As much as they say that they're, turning to wind energy and solar energy and becoming all green, they're planning projects that would set off massive amounts of carbon emissions, right?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, that if you look at the oil developments and gas developments that are planned on their books, they just do not square with these big climate commitments that they're making. And in a lot of cases, they're doing this thing that we talked about with BP earlier, right? Where they're forming a subsidiary company or a shell company, or they're doing a partnership with another oil company. And then there's a lot of very creative accounting for emissions that's happening. But what I really want to talk about is just there's a lot of blame that gets thrown at developing countries or less developed countries for taking the bait, right? Why would you start an oil industry in 2020? What's going to happen. Or, there was this big story in the New York Times about the Congo and how the president there agreed 8 months ago to not allow, oil drilling in some very ecologically important areas of the country and places that are big carbon sinks for the world. And then now is kind of going back on that and auctioning off land. And people are like, oh, it's so corrupt. That's terrible. All of this stuff. But we have to look at the fact that a lot of countries for about 30 or 40 years have been asking for the global north, which has profited enormously from fossil fuel development, to help offset the cost of leaving that stuff in the ground, right?
These countries are also on the front lines of the climate crisis, and nobody's coming to their aid when they suffer a climate disaster. Yeah, I was reading this super long article, but very good article in ProPublica about Barbados that's dealing with that exact problem because, in the Caribbean, there's this really interesting and devastating mix of being hyper on the front lines of climate change and hyper in debt that kind of doesn't exist anywhere else. Mm-hmm. It's like when folks in the global north want to ask folks in the Congo why they're auctioning off these leases. It's like they don't super have a lot of other options right now.
Guyana too, that's a coastal country, right? Like this is a coastal country. And Guyana also has the added layer of like quite a bit of its economy being dependent on ecotourism. So there's a huge risk there that as it becomes more of an oil country, it will lose that side of its economy, which will then only make it more dependent on the oil money, right? It's this vicious. Like really vicious cycle. But I've talked to a couple of different people there, and they're sort of like, well, we have people in extreme poverty. We, like no one is offering us money to not drill this oil. It reminds me of actually in Ecuador, like in 2012, the president then, Rafael Correa, he had this idea of like auctioning off oil in Yasuni National Park, but not for drilling, for saving. He was like, if we can get X amount of money, from global leaders, we can preserve this national park and not let people drill. And it will also keep X amount of, X millions of barrels of oil in the ground. And that will mean, large emission savings. And everyone was super excited about it. Like it got all this media coverage, right? It's like Planet Money did a whole podcast about it. It was, all over the news, Democracy Now!, everything. And I think out of the, couple $100 million that he was asking for, they got maybe like 20 million committed from global leaders. And this is like a story that you hear over and over again, right? Like the first time that less developed countries talked about what's now called loss and damages in international climate negotiations was like the very first one. They were talking about it in the early 90s. Mm-hmm. They were like, we need the people that have benefited financially from other nations' ability to deal with this problem, but also to incentivize countries with oil reserves to not develop them, and like, here we are. And yeah, you have this huge problem with, another wave of oil colonialism. You've got, so we talked about Guyana, we talked about the Congo. It's happening in Namibia. It's happening in Mozambique, Barbados. Like this, I think that people need to understand that, this is colonialism. Yeah. And that if you don't want these countries to develop their oil reserves, then they need another means of economic development. And the reason that they don't have it is not because like they aren't working hard enough or they're not talented or skilled enough, right? It's because they've been colonized and kept from developing their own industries. And exploited. Yeah.
So like these countries are kind of just getting into a place where they can profit from the oil that's been extracted from their land. So it's kind of hard to, when you're already cash strapped, you're debt ridden because of all these predatory loans from, the IMF and all of these places. It's really difficult to sit on the oil that would make you money when there's no other help coming, which is why climate reparations need to be real.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the other really, really fucked up part is that these oil companies are, of course, not offering great deals to these countries, right? These are like terrible contracts. The contract in Guyana basically requires that the Guyanese government pay for most of the cost associated with the development of these oil fields before they can make like real money off of the oil. It's like their percentage of the take from, these oil fields is minimal until they kind of pay off all of the expenses first, right? So like I was talking to this analyst who was looking at it, and he was explaining this to me, like walking me through the contract. And I was like, wait a minute. So they're never going to make like the kind of money that they're thinking they would make that makes this a good deal. And he was like, yeah, like they're not even, he's like, what they want to do with this oil money is pay off debt and fund some social problems. or fund some social programs to help with housing, food security, like the basic things that societies need. And what he's like, the way that it is structured now, they won't even pay off the debt. They won't even get out of debt. By doing
and again,
this.
This is sharecropping. This is sharecropping 101.
It absolutely is.
This is exactly how that system worked.
Exactly. It's like, oh, well, but like it's hard for countries that are dealing with extreme debt and poverty and all these other things to say no to a large sum of money right now.
Yeah.
Even though it will actually not solve the problem down the road, and it will create other problems down the road, and it will probably create other economic problems down the road. It's hard to say no to tens of billions of dollars when you're in an extreme amount of debt, right? Like it is, it's absolutely sharecropping. It's, those like payday loans.
Mm-hmm.
It's all of that.
Predatory.
It's all of that.
It's all predatory. And this is why, again, climate reparations are a solution and not just like a nice thing to do. Because otherwise it leaves people in a position where they have no choice but to do stuff like this.
Yeah. Exactly. And there's like so many other shitty things that go along with it too. Like in Mozambique. So just to like blow your mind with one stat here, the methane emissions from construction of just one LNG train there is going to increase the greenhouse gas emissions of that country, the whole country, by up to 14%. So like, you're turning entire countries into major greenhouse gas emitters, right? But also in Mozambique, so Mozambique was like on its own with no COVID cases for like a really long time at the start of the pandemic. And guess who brought COVID to Mozambique?
An oil worker?
Fucking oil workers. Yeah. Yeah. It was like people who were working on these LNG plants there. So,
of course. I feel like we're going to need a deeper dive into oil colonialism soon.
Yes. Yeah. There's a lot to talk about. Yeah. And yeah, it's happening. It's happening in a lot of places. And the oil companies that you hear attached to these things, they are not African oil companies. They are not Latin American oil companies. They are Total, Exxon, Chevron, BP,
Total is French for people who don't know. Total is French.
They are French.
Yeah. And they're on Twitter. Go fuck with them.
They are.
And we'll be back right after this ad. Hot Take is brought to you by Birch Living. I have been sleeping pretty good lately, waking up with a lot less back pain, waking up a little bit more refreshed, and also waking up earlier, which is great for me because I'm a morning person. I like being up when the sun rises.
I do too.
I think it's the most beautiful, most peaceful part of the day. You do too?
Yes.
I thought you just didn't sleep, so you were just up.
I like being up in the morning. It's quiet. Nobody, it's like, I don't know. It feels like a sort of a like peaceful moment before the craziness of the day. It's nice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I've had my Birch mattress since April, and I can definitely see myself waking up earlier and earlier as a result. So Birch mattresses are stylish, comfortable, and most importantly, they are environmentally conscious. The non-toxic mattresses are made right here in America, and they source only the finest quality materials like organic, fair trade cotton, organic wool, and natural latex to create luxurious mattresses designed to give you the best night's sleep. Amy, are you using your Birch mattress?
I am, and same. I actually was having huge back problems from sleeping on a mattress that was just not the right fit for me, I guess. My hips.
Oh,
yeah. I mean, maybe some, I think it depends on your, your back and your body type and whatever else. But yeah, I was waking up. I swear I was like, I guess this is just what old age feels like. And I am having so much less pain and sleeping way better and not waking up as much, which I'm now realizing too was like, oh, maybe I was waking up a lot because I was uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's awesome.
I mean, see, if you can get Amy to sleep, and basically the only other thing that does that is chloroform, it's a damn good mattress. Birch offers a 100-night risk-free trial. You can try out your new Birch mattress, see how your body adjusts, and if you decide it's not the best fit, you're welcome to return it for a full refund. They believe so strongly in the quality of their mattresses that each mattress includes a 25-year warranty. Birch mattresses are shipped directly from their manufacturing facility to your door for free. The mattress comes rolled up in a box and is super easy to set up. So we want to give all our listeners the ability to enjoy a deep, restful night's sleep with a new mattress from Birch. Birch is giving $400 off all mattresses and 2 free EcoRest pillows at birchliving.com/hot. That's $400 off and 2 free EcoRest pillows. Sleep better with Birch.
This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp Online Therapy. Whether you're struggling with grief, relationships, or stress, or you're having trouble sleeping or meeting goals, online therapy might be for you. BetterHelp is a secure online therapy that offers video, phone, and even live chat sessions with a licensed professional therapist. They can assess your needs and match you with an accredited therapist in under 48 hours. And you can log into your account anytime to send a message and get timely, thoughtful responses. This is the part I love the most about online therapy because I don't know, like, I feel like maybe I need to like talk to my therapist about time management, but I don't have a lot of time. And I'm often like, I don't know, up in the middle of the night thinking about some problem or another. So it's helpful to be able to just like send a note whenever I want to. It's also really great for folks who don't live in areas where there's a lot of therapists that are accessible to them, right? Like they have lots of different people available who have a ton of different types of expertise. So you can always kind of find someone no matter where you are.
Even if you do live in a city with a lot of
still
therapists,
hard to find the right match.
65.
Yeah.
Yeah, as I learned from John Oliver this week, 65% of psychologists in the United States are not taking new patients. So,
wow.
It's real.
That is really...
It's real out here.
That's staggering. Wow. Okay, so yeah. Head to BetterHelp.com. If you go to BetterHelp.com/hottake, you can join the over 2 million people who have taken charge of their mental health with the help of an experienced professional. Hot Take listeners get...
Not an Instagram account.
Yes, it's true. Sorry. It's true. Hot Take listeners get 10% off their first month of online therapy at BetterHelp.com/hottake. That's BetterHelp.com/hottake.
Okay, so I have a story that I've been dying to talk to you about that I think you might have been following it a little bit too. So stop me if you've heard this one already. So in Mariposa County, which is pretty near where the Oak Fire is burning, which has burned more than 19,000 acres, pretty scary. People have been being greeted by people in like camouflage and military gear, but they are not the sheriff's office. It's not the National Guard. It is members of the Echo Company militia. Are you hearing about this?
Yes. I just read a story about this that I found absolutely terrifying. It was by Chiara Sotile and Ben Collins for NBC, I think. And like, yes. And like, oh my God, I was reading it and I read this one paragraph and I found it so chilling because they were talking about how things like mega wildfires are good recruiting events for militias.
Yes.
And I was just like, fuck.
Yes.
Because remember, this happened in Oregon a couple years ago too.
Oh,
right?
it's happened
there were militia
plenty of other times.
Yes. And I remember being really freaked out by the Oregon one because militia had appointed themselves to like stop people who were evacuating because they were trying to figure out if like there were arsonists involved in the wildfires. And I was just like, oh my God, just imagine like you're scared. You know, we've talked about this before. The like evacuation math is very stressful. Like you're like, should I go? Should I stay? When do I go? Okay, I'm going to go. I've packed up my car. I've, loaded up my kids and my animals or whatever. And I'm on the road, and then I have to prove to some jack off in camouflage with a gun because, of course, right, that I am, just a normal person who is trying to get away from the fire and not someone who's like fleeing the scene of the crime.
So let's talk real quick about who Echo Company is. They're becoming this consistent presence in Mariposa County. It's not really clear how many members there are, and they were ousted from the larger California state militia organization in 2020 because they capitalized on these larger fictitious fears of Antifa looters and for, quote, behavior that was interpreted as potentially insightful and militant. So these people are too militant for the militias. That's some scary shit.
Oh, God. That is really scary.
They have inserted themselves. So like these people are not afraid to get involved. Actually, their motto is "We Who Dare."
Oh boy.
And when there's not a disaster, they're mostly known for holding training sessions for its members and attending protests. And yeah, that's some scary shit.
That is terrifying.
Yeah. And so
I also just want to set the scene for people of Mariposa County, because I know this county, it's near Yosemite. It's like in this little pocket of California. So like people think of California as being very liberal, and it is, but that makes the right-wing people in California really fucking crazy. Like they're so much more extreme.
They got represent, Amy.
Than this part of the state is where you will find the state of Jefferson, which is a little pocket of people in like Northern California and Southern Oregon who want to secede from the United States,
like Texas,
and create their they want to create like their whole own like new super conservative state because they claim that they're not being represented by their elected politicians.
Just so we're clear. Yeah.
Just so we're clear as who we're dealing with here.
And the sheriff's office is not trying to get rid of these folks. So on Sunday, the sheriff's office said that they had been made aware of the presence of the local militia. Here's what they said, direct quote: "We appreciate their effort and any of the efforts of other private groups or entities helping our communities."
Oh, God. They're just volunteers.
Yeah. It said that they were acting on their own courteous accord. So, yeah.
Wow.
Here's the other thing I wanted to talk about is that this providing immediate assistance right after a disaster is a really common recruiting technique for militias, like you just mentioned. So in the aftermath of the Oregon fires in 2020, there were civilian roadblocks, and they stopped at least one Black family and were ignored by the police. Members of the Oath Keepers have created a community protection team, 6 of whom were arrested for breaking curfew during Hurricane Michael in 2018. Had you heard of the Oath Keepers in 2018, Amy?
No. I feel like I heard about them, I think probably with most people in the context of the January 6th insurrection.
I heard about them in 2020 around the election, but these folks have been out here.
Yeah.
So one Oath Keeper named Joshua James, who stormed the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, met and joined the militia during relief efforts for Hurricane Irma in 2017. So,
wow.
Try to imagine if this were happening in any other country, like maybe one of the countries we were just talking about with oil colonialism, right? Where there's militias showing up after a disaster and offering aid and taking people in to join their ranks and handing out business cards with directions for how to join their ranks.
Oh, God.
Yeah. How is this not a civil war? Like, even the people who are quoted in these stories are asking for anonymity because they're afraid of pissing off the militia. So they're living in fear of these militias. Like, how are we not at civil war?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, again, maybe this is like, there's so many things to be concerned about here, but I think maybe the most concerning one is just like how in with the police these groups are. The fact that the sheriff is like, oh, they're just like helpful volunteers, and it's thanks for the helping hand, guys.
You know, it kind of sounds
It's
like Trump being like, they're not here to hurt me.
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
One last thing about these militias is that, like, okay, I can't prove this, but I wonder what happened to the militias that formed in the aftermath of Katrina. Because I feel like some of those folks probably stayed in touch and formed other militias.
Oh,
like just as a hunch.
I'm sure. Yeah, of course.
So, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. This is why, why we talk about ecofascism so much. Like, it's fucking real. And this is what it looks like in practice.
It's really scary. Again, I just feel like the idea that, like, you could be in real, like, survival mode crisis and, come up against these guys is just very, very, it's scary.
It is really scary.
And also, I think this is like where the gun reform stuff really dovetails with climate too, because like what makes it super scary is that these guys are armed to the teeth, and that gives them control and power in a way that they wouldn't have if they didn't have their guns and their sort of like military cosplay stuff,
Right.
Like, I'm sure a lot of people see them and think, oh, it's National Guard, right? Like, I mean, you're not really thinking about that in an extreme weather event. You're just like, especially if you've evacuated and you've like run from a fire.
I mean, it should be the National Guard, right? But like our disaster response to this country is trash. So,
well, that's another thing, right? It's like, this is why talking about like FEMA and disaster relief and all of that is really important in the context of this stuff, because look at the huge vacuum that's there for these guys to fill.
Exactly.
Oh, God, that's so scary. That is so scary. Okay, I have a much less scary, more funny surprise story for you.
Oh, thank God.
It's funny, but also bad, but also something that I'm like, this seems like it's like a problem that can easily be fixed. So I have been following this sort of like resurgence of the private jet CO2 emissions discourse.
How did I know? Yes. Okay, tell me.
Yes. It is hilarious.
I've been like seeing little snippets of the discourse on Twitter and being like, you have to like be like, am I going to go down this rabbit hole or not? And I haven't gone down this one. So I'm glad you're going to tell me what it is.
Okay, Mary, my surprise for you is that the celebrity private jet CO2 discourse is back. And it's kind of amazing.
Please don't tell me this is about Beyonce. Please.
It's not. Actually, Kylie Jenner and Taylor Swift seem to be the two people getting the most
white ladies,
heat right now. Yeah. So Taylor Swift was found to have the highest carbon footprint for her private jet usage. And her response today was to say that she loans her private jet out a lot, and that's why.
Who's borrowing Taylor Swift's private jet?
I don't know, but also I'm like, that's not the point, Taylor. That's not the point. Like, the total emissions is the total emissions, whether it's you or like your friend who's flying on your private jet. The problem is the private jet, not who's flying in it.
Are they like going to Costco? Like, how do you take a private jet? Where are you going? In a panty?
Some of them are genuinely like doing quick little errands and stuff. So actually, our friend Darna Noor, who filled in for me earlier this month, she wrote about this for the Boston Globe because Kylie Jenner took like a 17-minute private jet trip.
17
minutes. Yes.
Where was she going?
So this all started because there was an Instagram photo that she posted with her and her boyfriend, and they had their two private jets side by side. Her boyfriend is Travis Scott.
Oh, yeah.
And the caption,
I saw this.
Yeah, the caption said, "You want to take mine or yours?"
And it was two planes.
It was two
It's
planes,
not the flex
yes.
you think it is. It's really not.
It's so gross. So then there's this app called Celeb Jets that tracks celebrities' private plane flights. And so she flew from Camarillo to Van Nuys. That is insane. That is like, so basically like she was in you know, like a little bit further north in California, and she flew home in her private plane. So I don't know who she was.
How long of a drive is that?
It's like a 45-minute drive. This is truly like just ridiculous. So then this kicked off like a whole batch of stories where people were comparing other celebrities' CO2 emissions. And this is how we found out that actually Taylor Swift is the biggest offender. So this was done by insider.com. They looked at it, and it's all of the Kardashians are bad. Kylie Jenner too, Blake Shelton, Oprah Winfrey is on there as well. But I don't think that Beyonce is even on the list. Hold on, I'm pulling it up right now so I can tell you for sure.
I mean, look, I
she's not
need
in the
all
top
of
three.
these people
No.
off of their private jets. I really do.
The reason I'm bringing this up is not because it's kind of fun to poke fun at Taylor Swift, which of course it is. But please, Taylor Swift people, don't get mad at me. I'm sorry, but
just to be very clear, it's Amy who is coming.
It was all my friends.
It's Amy who's coming for Tay-Tay, not me. All right. I'm disappointed. I'm not mad. I'm just disappointed, Taylor.
Taylor's jet is loaned out regularly to other individuals. To attribute most or all of these trips to her is blatantly incorrect. This is the statement that Taylor Swift's publicist sent to Insider. The point here is that having a private jet is just totally unnecessary. I honestly feel like of all of the conversations around not flying or flying less related to climate, this just seems like the easiest thing to get rid of. Like, why have we not just banned private jets at this point? This is the type of individual action that actually is a really big problem. These are heavy, heavy emissions, and they're completely unnecessarily. You know, like you cannot make any argument that's like, but I really needed, like, it's not a medical emergency. It's not like, oh, you know, my family lives far away and I need to see them sometimes. You know, there are like, I think, reasonable justifications for some people to fly sometimes, right? Maybe people are required to travel for work, all of that stuff. This is ridiculous.
A 17-minute flight. Because that also makes me think of the time that, you know, the Kardashian Malibu home was being threatened by the wildfires, and they got private firefighters to protect their home.
That's right. That's becoming more and more of a thing in Southern California in particular.
Of course it is. On that show, We Crashed, about WeWork, you know, the wife was all about, like, we absolutely have to make sure WeWork is completely vegan now, because now we have the private jet. We have to offset our emissions. And I don't know if they put that in as
a
joke
classic
or what.
Well, I mean, I think it was a joke. It was like, I thought that was like a pretty smart critique of like how people think about these things, because just to like put it in some numbers, private jet trips were responsible for almost 34 million metric tons of carbon pollution in 2016. I'm sure it's only gone up since there. That's more than some countries emit in an entire year.
Yeah.
So an entire country worth of emissions just from private jet trips. And we're talking about like a pretty small group of people, right? Like, how many people have private jets?
So
not
1%.
that many. So yeah, exactly. So I think, to me, I was like, oh, this is a really good example of this thing that I thought the last IPCC report did really well, which is point out the fact that when we're talking about individual actions versus systemic change, it's important to, again, inject some nuance into that conversation and remember that the wealthiest people in the world, their individual actions, especially when it's stuff like taking a private jet everywhere, actually do have a major impact, you know? And like, there are ways in which those kinds of individual actions actually really impact the larger problem, but also the systemic options that are available to people. You know, like if Kylie Jenner was like, you know what, actually, I'm not going to take my private jet anymore because I'm so concerned about climate change, that could actually have like a pretty huge ripple effect on just how people even think about, you know, emissions and climate change and whatever. But yeah, I have to say, it's been a delight to read about all of this stuff. It's very entertaining and like just kind of ridiculous to hear how some folks try to explain away these ridiculous trips. The 17-minute Camarillo to Van Nuys thing is just, I mean, she probably just didn't want to sit in traffic. You know?
Kylie, they could never live in Mississippi. I'll tell you that. Because a 17-minute flight to go 45-minute drive, like that's running to the store. A 45-minute drive is running to the store for us.
I know.
Like,
yeah.
She couldn't cut it.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Ridiculous. Ridiculous. Yes. All right. Mary, it's been a few weeks since we had a good billionaire burn, but I have one for you today.
I cannot wait.
Billionaire burn! The billionaire burn! Everyone's favorite fascist, Peter Thiel.
Okay, can I make one quick confession? So every time someone says the name Peter Thiel, I picture Frank Luntz. And I know intellectually that they are different people.
They kind of look alike.
They don't look alike. I just looked them up right before we started recording and was like, nope, different person, totally different face, whole different person.
I always think whenever I see stories circulating about Peter Thiel, I just think about Silicon Valley, the HBO show, because like he's the inspiration for one of the characters on there, and it's just like so. It seems so just like dead on. He has complained about how he's portrayed in that show, but it seems very accurate to me based on everything I've ever read about him. Anyway, Peter Thiel, for those who don't know, is like a Silicon Valley gazillionaire. He made lots and lots of money in tech. He has invested in lots of different things. He has been a venture capitalist for a really long time. He's a well-known libertarian tech guy, so he has, that whole universe. And then, like for a really long time, he was sort of the classic libertarian, which is like socially liberal but fiscally conservative. Oh, he also, people might know him also for taking down Gawker. So Gawker basically outed Peter Thiel, which was not cool. You know, I think everyone can agree it's uncool for people to do that. But his retaliation was to basically fund Hulk Hogan filing a lawsuit against Gawker, which financially bankrupted the company and like took them out for good. And I believe, wasn't the Hogan thing like about some kind of sex tape?
Yes, it was
too?
about a
it
sex
was
tape.
wild, that
There's
story.
a whole documentary about it on Netflix. It's crazy. Yeah.
Yes. It is really crazy. Really crazy. So anyway, Peter Thiel likes to take down his enemies, which, you know, respect. But
I mean, when you put that type of power into a libertarian tech bro, which I think we're all kind of learning is just, you know, the polite way of saying fascist in the making, you know? Like,
yeah, exactly. I feel like people outside of California especially were very surprised when he became a huge Trump backer in the 2016 election and beyond. But I think, I don't know, for me, I was like, yeah, that tracks. Like, if you know those people, you know that they totally would back someone like Trump.
Where does Peter Thiel come down on climate change? Like, does he feel like it's real, but it's really far in the future and therefore not our problem and we can geoengineer our way out of it? Or, like, where does he...
There was a story a couple years ago about like this guy wrote in, I want to say, the Believer magazine about how it wasn't a matter of like utopia versus dystopia. He was predicting a climate feudalism where like the wealthiest few basically like enslaved the rest of us and kept all the resources for themselves. And that is like the world that Peter Thiel, I think, is like imagining himself being very powerful in. So like it's real and he's going to capitalize on it.
I see. So let me guess, he's got a bunker?
He's got a bunker in New Zealand. Yes, he does.
Of course he does.
Yes.
Remember in the early days of the pandemic, all of these like super rich people were going to, like they had bought bunkers a long time ago quietly, nobody knew, and then they went to live in their bunkers during the pandemic?
Yes. I think he did that at like one point in the pandemic. Yeah. He's very strange on the climate front. Trump gave him a taste for these populist politicians. And now he's backing a bunch of people in different state races. So the two that he's really spent a ton of money on are Arizona and Ohio. He's backing J.D. Vance, everyone's favorite fake working class guy in Ohio. And he's backing a guy named Blake Masters in Arizona. And they're both like, I don't know. I mean, J.D. Vance, I feel like kind of feels a bit more Trumpian, you know, like he seems like he's just kind of out for himself. Like he's just like, will say whatever to get power and money, you know. Blake Masters is like a total fascist. And that's the stuff that really I think is concerning about Peter Thiel. It's not just that he like wants power and money. He has said over and over again that he thinks that like democracy is a bad idea. Like he says that out loud. Yeah, like he's been saying it for like a decade, you know, like he's very in with the sort of like Heritage Foundation people who are like, actually, democracy is a mess. And actually, there are some people that you really don't want voting. Oh, yeah. He complains about women having the vote. Also, a thing to know about Peter Thiel. And he has like endless amounts of money, right? And he's getting involved in state politics now. And the other thing that he's done recently, which is why he's kind of like been making headlines again, is he has backed a new investment fund whose stated intention is to basically compete with like BlackRock and those kinds of funds, which Peter Thiel claims are too ideological and woke. Yes, exactly. Yeah. And therefore are not focused on the right thing, which is making money. And when it comes down to climate change, he's like, if it, you know, like any investment fund their only focus should be getting money in the hands of their shareholders. And if that's your focus, then you should be all in on fossil fuels. And like, who cares about climate change? Which I don't even think makes financial sense, actually, above and beyond all of the other reasons that, you know, we would be opposed to that idea. I don't think BlackRock started to care about climate out of like, you know, wokeness or the goodness of their hearts or like, yeah, wanting to appear enlightened or any of these things. Like, I think they looked at it and were like, oh, financially, this is not going to pan out, right? Peter Thiel's argument is like, you should be making as much as you can off of fossil fuels in the short term and like then, you know, transition. He kind of has his money in like a variety of things. Like he's not opposed to clean tech. He's just like, why wouldn't you also make money off of fossil fuels, you know? And he's kind of like, you know, investment funds should be politically and ideologically agnostic and you should just like be investing in whatever. And, you know, actually this whole idea for this fund came about in part as a response to the hedge fund that got seats on Exxon's board with the intention of like getting Exxon to move away from fossil fuels. So they were just like, oh, this shareholder activism thing has gone too far. And, you know, ESG, so environmental, social, and governance investing has gone too far. And it's like, it's ideological and it's not about making money. You know, I think there's a lot of problems with ESG actually. So I'm not like a huge ESG stan, but I mean, I think you have to be pretty far right and pretty conservative to think that the investment world has gone too far on climate. You know? Like, okay. They're still funding like every fossil fuel development. So I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, Peter Thiel, really creepy, scary guy. I hope he gets a bad batch of blood from one of his blood boys someday. Just
I'm kind of scared of someone like that becoming a Republican kingmaker, right? Like I remember just thinking back to previous Republican presidential cycles, the people who like had candidates in the race were like Sheldon Adelson and like all these other like really gross old Republican billionaires. Peter Thiel ain't old.
No.
And he's just as dangerous.
Yeah.
You know, I think we used to have this really comforting idea that it was the old white men that we needed to worry about. But those old white men were young at some point. And they were people like Peter Thiel, and they just kept their money and kept putting it into politics.
I think he's way scarier because he's also like he is like similar to Steve Bannon and like that kind of mindset of like apocalyptic things are an opportunity, like and like that, you know, very much this like just a thought exercise. What if no democracy? Like he's super comfortable.
I'm just asking
with that.
questions.
I'm just asking questions. Yeah, I'm just spitballing here.
Yeah.
What's democracy ever done for us? Certainly hasn't made us more money. Hasn't made us safer. You know what I mean? Like he's very comfortable having those conversations, and in a way that like even Trump is like that comfortable having. You know, like at least in public, the fact that he's so comfortable saying this shit, like. Why did we ever give women the vote? It's just like, wow, okay. Like, there's
Yeah.
Anyway, that's it. Peter Thiel, a gross and disturbing guy who I hope crashes on a rocket one day.
Hard same. Or at least, you know, goes into the bunker and stays there.
And never comes back. Oh, yeah, that'd be good. What if like something went wrong with like the oxygen in the bunker? Just spitballing. Just a thought exercise.
Oh my God. And on that note, that's it for Hot Take this week, folks. Come back next week when Amy has been censored within an inch of her life. Happy August.
Bye. Thought exercise. Just a thought exercise.
I'm just asking questions. Hot Take is a Crooked Media production.
It's produced by Ray Pang and mixed and edited by Jules Bradley. Our music is by Vasilis Fotopoulos. Thamali Kodakara is our consulting producer. And our executive producers are Mary Anais Hegler, Michael Martinez, and me, Amy Westervelt.
Special thanks to Sandy Gerard, Ari Schwartz, Kyle Seglin, and Charlotte Landis for production support, and to Amelia Montuth for digital support.
You can follow the show on Twitter @RealHotTake, sign up for our newsletter at hottakepod.com, and subscribe to Crooked Media's video channel at youtube.com/crookedmedia.